we're going to be exploring something that I think you're going to find really, really fascinating. We're diving into the world of tiny farmhouses.
Oh, yeah.
You've given us some really great sources, and it seems like you're looking for that, that perfect blend of rustic charm with modern practicality, all within a smaller footprint.
Yeah, I think it's there's definitely a movement towards this idea sort of like scaling down, but not giving up on the things we love about, those classic farmhouse features, the gabled roofs and the welcoming porches, but fitting them into a home that's often, under 1,000 square feet. There's a real art to it, I think,
Yeah,
It's not easy to do.
absolutely. And I think, I'm already seeing from the sources that this isn't just about downsizing. It's
Hmm.
almost a philosophy of living.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on something really important there. I think there's definitely this sense of intentionality with tiny farmhouses. It's about simplifying, focusing on experiences over material possessions, and really trying to find a way to live that's more in harmony with nature.
Okay, so let's dig into that a bit more. Why are tiny farmhouses suddenly becoming so popular? What is it about this style that speaks to people on such a deep level?
I think it's a really interesting question. And I think, when you think about what we crave in a home, we want it to be functional, of course, but also, a place where we can relax and kind of recharge. And tiny farmhouses, they seem to hit that sweet spot. They offer that sense of coziness and warmth that's often associated with traditional farmhouses, but in a way that's, really adapted for modern living.
Hmm? I'm seeing a lot about open floor plans in these articles. Is that part of the appeal?
Yeah, absolutely. Open floor plans are huge in tiny farmhouse design. And I think it's more than just a stylistic choice. It's really about making that small space feel larger and more connected. And I think,
Mm.
without those walls, you get a greater sense of flow and it encourages interaction between different areas of the home.
Right. It seems like, you would also have to be really smart about incorporating natural light into a smaller space.
Yeah, and that's where you see, features like large windows, which are another hallmark of tiny farmhouses. And they, obviously they bring in tons of natural light, but they also create that visual connection to the outdoors, which is so important for, that farmhouse feel.
Hmm.
And then you have features like vaulted ceilings, which add a sense of volume and spaciousness without actually expanding the footprint of the home.
Those are great points. And what about those iconic wraparound porches? I imagine they're not just for show in a tiny farmhouse.
Well, you're right. In these smaller homes, they serve a really practical purpose. They essentially extend your living space into the outdoors, creating this kind of seamless transition between the inside and the outside. Picture yourself having your morning coffee or reading a book on a cozy wraparound porch.
Right.
It's, you're expanding your living space without adding square footage.
Okay, so we've got the charm and the functionality, but for a lot of people, the decision to go tiny is also about practicality and finances. What kind of advantages are we talking about here?
Well, cost effectiveness is huge for a lot of people. Think about it. A smaller home, that means lower building costs. You're going to have smaller utility bills. You have less to furnish and maintain, and that frees up a lot of financial resources that you can then use for, other things that are important to you, like travel or hobbies or even just peace of mind.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm seeing in your sources that tiny farmhouses are often praised for their energy efficiency.
Right. Smaller homes simply require less energy to heat and cool, which not only benefits, your wallet, but is also, much better for the environment.
Hmm.
And speaking of the environment, a lot of tiny farmhouse enthusiasts are drawn to, the sustainability aspect. They'll often incorporate eco-friendly building materials and features like solar panels or composting toilets, as ways to minimize their impact.
So it sounds like there's a real sense of mindful living that comes with embracing this, tiny farmhouse lifestyle.
Absolutely. It's about making, conscious choices that align with your values, whether it's, financial freedom or environmental responsibility, or simply, creating a space that feels authentic to you.
And I'm sure there's not just one cookie cutter approach to building a tiny farmhouse.
Yeah.
What are some of the different, design options people are exploring?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of variety out there. You could go with a prefabricated kit, which is great for people who want a more streamlined and potentially, more affordable building process. Or you could work with a builder to create a completely custom design that's, tailored to your specific needs and preferences.
So it sounds like there's a lot of flexibility to, make it your own, even within, the constraints of a smaller space. I'm kind of curious about those constraints, though. I imagine designing a tiny farmhouse comes with its own, set of unique challenges.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges is, figuring out how to make the most of every square inch of space without sacrificing, functionality or aesthetics.
Right.
It requires a lot of creative thinking.
I bet. That probably leads to some really innovative um, ideas.
Yeah.
What are some examples of how people are kind of, overcoming those design challenges in tiny farmhouses?
Well, one common strategy is to incorporate, multifunctional furniture. Think about a coffee table that can be raised to dining height, or a sofa that converts into a bed. These types of pieces help you maximize space without compromising on comfort or style.
It's like a puzzle, figuring out how to fit everything you need into that smaller space.
Exactly. And I think, that's where the fun comes in. You really have to get creative and think outside the box. And then, another challenge is storage. You have to be really strategic about where you store things, and you often have to get creative with, vertical space, using lofts and built-in shelves and under bed storage, to maximize every nook and cranny.
It seems like tiny farmhouse living would really encourage a more minimalist approach to possessions.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. You can't hold on to everything when you're living in a smaller space. It forces you to really evaluate what's important and to let go of things that no longer serve you.
That sounds like it could be a really liberating experience in itself.
Yeah, it can be. For a lot of people, the process of downsizing is a chance to declutter, not just their homes, but also their lives.
I love that. It's almost like a mental and emotional cleanse,
Yeah.
as well as a physical one. But let's get back to the design aspect for a moment. We've talked about the practicalities, but what about the aesthetics? What are some of the key elements that give, tiny farmhouses the distinct, you know, cozy and inviting feel?
Well, I think one of the most important elements is the use of, natural materials. Think exposed wood beams or reclaimed barnwood accents or, shiplap walls. These types of features, they add warmth and texture and they create that rustic kind of lived-in vibe that's so characteristic of, farmhouse style.
I can practically smell the fresh baked bread
Yeah.
and hear the crackling fire just thinking about it. It's funny, you don't often hear minimalism and cozy used together,
Yeah.
but it seems like tiny farmhouses really manage to pull that off.
They do. And I think it's not just about the materials themselves, it's about the way those materials are used. There's often a sense of kind of imperfection and authenticity in tiny farmhouse design, which makes the space feel more welcoming and less sterile than, a typical kind of minimalist aesthetic.
I see what you mean. It's like those perfectly imperfect details that give the space character. Speaking of character, I imagine a lot of people who are drawn to, tiny farmhouses also want to kind of infuse their own personality into the design.
Yeah.
What are some ways they can do that?
Well, one of the great things about tiny farmhouse design is that it lends itself beautifully to personalization. You can really let your own style shine through in the way you choose to decorate and furnish your space. Vintage and antique finds are really popular in tiny farmhouses.
Yeah.
They add a touch of history and personality.
Oh, I love that. It's like bringing in pieces with their own stories to tell.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be expensive either. You can find amazing treasures at flea markets and antique shops and even online. It's all about the hunt and finding those pieces that speak to you.
So it sounds like creating a tiny farmhouse is as much about the journey as it is about the destination.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's about, the process of discovery, of learning new skills, of expressing your creativity, and ultimately of, building a space that truly feels like home.
Well, I'm definitely hooked on this idea of tiny farmhouse living. I can't wait to dive even deeper into the specifics of design and decor. What do you say we move on to exploring some of the more visual aspects from your sources? I'm particularly interested in those charming double-hung windows and how they can be incorporated into a tiny farmhouse.
Let's do it. I think you'll find some really inspiring examples. Those double hung windows you mentioned, they're a great place to start. They're not just charming, they're incredibly practical, especially in a smaller home where, ventilation and airflow are so important.
Right, that makes sense. And I'm seeing in these photos that people are getting really creative with, how they use them.
Oh, absolutely. You'll often see them paired with window seats, creating a cozy little nook for reading or just enjoying the view. And, because they open from both the top and bottom, you can really control that airflow and create a nice cross breeze.
It's those little details that can make such a big difference, especially when you're working with a smaller space. Now, I'm curious about something I've seen mentioned a few times in these sources, board and batten siding. Can you explain what that is and why it's so popular for tiny farmhouses?
Yeah, it's all about that classic farmhouse look. Board and batten siding is basically it's a style where wider vertical boards are spaced apart and then narrower strips called battens are used to cover the gaps. And it creates this lovely textured look that's very visually appealing, and it also adds, some structural strength.
I can see why it would fit so well with the overall aesthetic. And it seems like there are a lot of options when it comes to color choices as well.
Oh, for sure. While those traditional white or cream colors are always popular, you're also seeing, bolder choices these days like dark grays and even black, which can create a really striking contrast, especially when paired with like a natural wood porch or, some vibrant landscaping.
I love that idea of playing with, those contrasting elements. Speaking of landscaping, what are some ways people are kind of incorporating that into their tiny farmhouse designs?
It's such an important aspect. Even with a smaller footprint, you can still create, a really beautiful and functional outdoor space that complements the home. I'm seeing a lot of raised garden beds, which are perfect for, growing your own vegetables and herbs.
It's that connection to nature again, which seems to be, a recurring theme in tiny farmhouse living.
Exactly. And you don't need a lot of space to achieve it. Even a few potted plants or a small flower garden can make a big difference. And then there are features like, pergolas or arbors, which can create a sense of enclosure and privacy, even on a smaller lot.
Those sound lovely. I'm also seeing some examples of like outdoor fire pits and patios. Is that something that people are incorporating into their tiny farmhouse designs?
Absolutely. It's all about extending that living space outdoors and creating, areas for entertaining and relaxation. Imagine cozying up around a fire pit on a cool evening or hosting a barbecue with friends on a spacious patio.
Oh, it sounds idyllic. Now let's shift gears for a moment and talk about the practicalities of actually building a tiny farmhouse.
Mhm.
What are some of the key considerations people should keep in mind?
Well, I think one of the first things is location.
Yeah.
Where do you envision your tiny farmhouse? Do you want to be kind of nestled in the woods, surrounded by nature, or perhaps closer to a town or city, with access to amenities?
That's a big one
Yeah.
for sure. And I imagine, zoning regulations and building codes can vary quite a bit depending on the location.
You're absolutely right. It's crucial to research the local regulations and make sure your, tiny farmhouse plans are compliant. Some areas are more welcoming to tiny homes than others, and it's important to be prepared for any potential roadblocks.
That's great advice. And what about financing? Are there specific challenges when it comes to getting a loan for a tiny farmhouse?
Yeah, financing can be a little bit tricky with tiny homes. Traditional mortgages aren't always an option, so you might need to explore, alternative financing routes like personal loans or, specialized lenders who cater to the tiny house market.
That's really important information for anyone considering this path. It's definitely something you'd want to research, thoroughly before jumping in.
For sure. And then, another thing to think about is whether you want your tiny farmhouse to be stationary or on wheels.
That's an interesting distinction. What are the kind of the pros and cons of each approach?
Well, a stationary tiny farmhouse, permanently fixed to a foundation, which can give you, more stability and often makes it easier to get, permits and financing. A tiny house on wheels, on the other hand, it offers the flexibility of being able to move your home if your needs or circumstances change.
I can see the appeal of both options depending on your, lifestyle and priorities. I'm also curious about the actual building process. Are there specific construction methods that are particularly well suited to tiny farmhouses?
Yeah, there are different approaches. Some people choose to build their tiny farmhouse from scratch, which gives them, complete control over the design and the materials. Others opt for, prefabricated kits, which can simplify the process and often save, time and money.
So there's a path for just about every skill level and budget. Now, I know we've touched on this a bit, but I want to circle back to the sustainability aspect of tiny farmhouse living. It seems like that's a big draw for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a core value for, a lot of tiny farmhouse enthusiasts. And there are so many ways to incorporate sustainable practices into your home, from, using reclaimed and recycled materials to installing solar panels and composting toilets.
Those are great examples. And it's not just about the building materials, is it? There's a whole philosophy of living that goes along with it.
Exactly. It's about, reducing your environmental footprint in all aspects of your life. Think about things like growing your own food and reducing energy consumption and minimizing waste.
It's almost like a return to a simply more mindful way of life.
You've hit the nail on the head. And I think that's a big part of the appeal for a lot of people. It's a rejection of the consumerism and excess that, often characterize modern life and
Yeah.
a return to, a more intentional and fulfilling way of being.
That's a really beautiful way to put it. Now, before we move on to the next section, I want to take a moment to address something that might be on our listeners' mind.
Sure. What's that?
Well, we've talked a lot about the positives of tiny farmhouse living, but I imagine there are also some, challenges and potential downsides. Is there anything you'd like to highlight in terms of, those considerations?
That's a great point. And it's important to be realistic. One of the biggest challenges, of course, is the limited space. It requires a significant shift in mindset, to adapt to living with less stuff and in closer quarters. And, for some people, that can be a difficult adjustment.
I can imagine it would take some getting used to. What are some other things people should consider before, making the leap to tiny farmhouse living?
Well, privacy can be an issue, especially if you're living with a family or have frequent guests. You really have to be comfortable with, close proximity to others. And then there's the practical aspect of things like, laundry and cooking and storage. You have to be very organized and efficient in a smaller space.
Mm. It sounds like, tiny farmhouse living isn't for everyone. But for those who are drawn to it, the rewards can be great.
Absolutely. It's about finding the right fit for your lifestyle and personality. And, for a lot of people, the sense of freedom and simplicity and connection to nature that comes with tiny farmhouse living far outweighs any challenges.
I can definitely see that. Now, I'm really excited to dive into some specific examples of tiny farmhouses that have been brought to life. I'm sure there are some, amazing stories and design inspiration to be found in your sources.
Let's do it. I think you'll be amazed by the creativity and ingenuity people are bringing to this movement.
Right, I'm ready.
Okay. So, picture this, all right. A young couple, let's just call them Sarah and John. They ditch their cramped city apartment and they decide to build a tiny farmhouse right in the middle of a blueberry farm.
Okay, I'm picturing it. That sounds pretty idyllic.
It is. And they documented their whole journey from design to construction in one of the blogs you shared. And what's so interesting is that they didn't go the traditional route of a bank loan. They actually used crowdfunding
Oh,
to
wow.
raise a significant portion of their building costs.
That's a really creative way to finance a dream. I bet their story resonated with a lot of people, who are also yearning for a simpler, more sustainable lifestyle.
You're right. Their project really seemed to capture a lot of people's imaginations. And what I love about their tiny farmhouse is how they incorporated so many salvaged and reclaimed materials.
Oh, nice.
Like they have this beautiful kitchen island made from old barn wood, and their bathroom vanity is actually a repurposed antique dresser.
Oh, that's cool. It sounds like they have a real knack for blending the old with the new.
They do. And they didn't sacrifice any modern conveniences either. They have a fully functional kitchen with all energy-efficient appliances, a spa-like bathroom with a composting toilet, and a cozy loft bedroom with a skylight for stargazing.
Wow. They really thought of everything. It's amazing how much they fit into such a small space.
It is. And, their story highlights something that I think is really important. Building a tiny farmhouse, it isn't just about the finished product, right? It's really about the journey. It's about learning new skills and being resourceful and creating something, really meaningful with your own two hands.
I'm sensing a theme here. It seems like this sense of empowerment and self-sufficiency is a big part of what draws people to this, tiny farmhouse living.
Absolutely. It's about, taking control of your living space and creating a home that reflects your values. And it's not just about the physical structure, it's about the lifestyle. A lot of tiny farmhouse owners are passionate about gardening, raising chickens, and just, generally living in a way that's connected to nature.
It's like a whole movement, isn't it? A return to a simpler, more grounded way of life.
It is. And it's really exciting to see how this movement is evolving and inspiring people all over the world to, rethink the way they live.
Okay, I'm ready for another story. What else did you find?
All right, this one is a little bit different. Imagine a single mom, let's call her Emily. She decides to build her own tiny farmhouse as a way to escape, the cycle of renting and create a stable home for herself and her two young children.
I love that. What a powerful example of taking charge.
Right. And what's amazing is Emily, she didn't have any prior construction experience, but she was determined to make it happen. She just learned everything she could, from online resources, and she attended workshops. She even volunteered on other tiny house builds to kind of get that hands-on experience.
That's incredible. She sounds like she has a real DIY spirit.
She does, and her tiny farmhouse is a testament to that. It's full of really clever space-saving solutions like built-in bunk beds for her kids and a fold-down table that doubles as a desk and a multifunctional kitchen island that also serves as a dining area.
It sounds like she maximized every inch. What about the aesthetic? Did she go with the classic farmhouse look?
She did, but she, added her own personal touch as well. She painted the exterior like a cheerful shade of yellow, and the interior is decorated with, bright textiles and whimsical artwork. She even built a small playhouse for her kids on the back porch.
Oh, that's cute. It sounds like a really unique space. Her
Yeah.
story is really inspiring.
It is, and it shows that, tiny farmhouse living isn't just for young couples or retirees. It can be a wonderful option for families and single parents and really anyone who's looking for a more affordable, sustainable, and, ultimately fulfilling way of life.
I'm noticing a trend here.
Yeah.
It seems like the people who are drawn to tiny farmhouses are also those who are seeking a stronger sense of community and connection.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The tiny house movement in general has fostered a real sense of community, with people sharing ideas and resources and support. And that extends to the tiny farmhouse community as well.
Mhm.
There are all these online forums and social media groups and even festivals where people can connect and learn from each other.
That's fantastic. I love that. You know that there's this whole network of people who are passionate about this lifestyle and eager to help others.
Yeah, it's really inspiring. And it goes beyond, just the practical aspects of building and living in a tiny house. There's also, this shared commitment to values like simplicity, sustainability, and intentional living.
It's like a whole philosophy of life, isn't it?
Exactly. And it's a philosophy that's, really resonating with more and more people every day.
Well, I have to say, this deep dive has really opened my eyes to the world of tiny farmhouses.
Hmm.
I'm so impressed by the creativity, the ingenuity, and the heart that goes into creating these homes.
Me too. It's been a pleasure kind of exploring these sources with you, and I hope our listener got a lot out of this deep dive as they continue their journey.
I agree. There's so much potential here, not just for, creating beautiful and functional homes, but for really building a more sustainable future.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a thought. If you could design your own tiny farmhouse, what elements would you include? What would make it uniquely yours?
That's a wonderful question to ponder. I think I definitely want a cozy wraparound porch with a swing, perfect for those warm summer evenings, and a big garden where I could grow all my vegetables and flowers.
Oh, I love that. I can already picture you sipping lemonade on that porch, surrounded by the beauty of nature.
That sounds like a dream come true. And who knows, maybe one day. For now, I'm just grateful for the inspiration.
Me too. Thanks for joining us.